The Lakeside Legacy, a Detective Shernan investigation viewer discretion advisory. This story contains sensitive content, including descriptions of violence, manipulation, and psychological distress. It is intended for mature audiences 18 years and older. The names of all individuals involved have been changed to protect their identities. This presentation is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. Legal disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this story are those of Detective Shernan and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any law enforcement agency. This content is not intended to serve as legal advice or encourage any form of vigilante justice. Introduction. Have you ever felt that prickling sensation at the back of your neck? That intuitive whisper telling you something isn't quite right? In my 30 years as a detective, I've learned to trust that feeling it saved my life more than once. I'm Detective Marcus Shernan, and I specialize in cases that others have given up on, the files marked cold or unsolved that collect dust in basement archives. The forgotten ones, the mysteries that haunt families for generations, the questions that linger in small towns long after the headlines fade and the public moves on. Tonight, I'm going to take you through one of the most perplexing cases of my career, a mystery that began with a simple disappearance in a picturesque lakeside community and unraveled into something far more sinister. A case where nothing was as it seemed, where every answer led to 3 more questions, and where the line between victim and perpetrator blurred until I questioned my own judgment. The year was 2014. The lakeside town of Millhaven was experiencing its most prosperous summer in decades. Tourism was booming, property values were soaring, and the local economy was thriving. Picture-perfect family vacations played out against the backdrop of crystal blue waters and lush green forests. But beneath this idyllic surface, something dark was stirring, something that would shatter the town's peaceful facade and expose secrets buried for generations. When successful real estate developer Eleanor Whitman vanished without a trace from her lakefront mansion during a glamorous charity gala, it initially seemed like a straightforward case, perhaps a kidnapping for ransom. Given her wealth, or maybe even a voluntary disappearance. But as I peeled back the layers of Eleanor's life and the town's history, I discovered a labyrinth of deceit, revenge, and buried trauma that would challenge everything I thought I knew about human nature. I invite you to walk this twisted path with me. Put yourself in my shoes and in the shoes of every person connected to this mystery. Ask yourself what you would do, how far you would go to protect yourself and those you love. Because the most frightening reality I've discovered in my career is not the monsters who commit heinous acts, but the ordinary people who find themselves capable of extraordinary darkness when pushed to their limits. Let me take you back to that summer evening when everything changed, not just for Eleanor Whitman, but for an entire community built on secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. The call. It was just past midnight on a sweltering July evening when my phone rang. I was in my study, poring over another cold KC habit that has cost me 2 marriages and more sleepless nights than I care to count. The voice on the other end belonged to Police Chief Raymond Wallace, an old colleague from my days at the academy. "Marcus," he said, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "I need your help. We've got a situation in Millhaven that's complicated. A high-profile disappearance with political implications. The mayor's breathing down my neck, and I'm out of my depth here. I'd known Ray for 25 years. He wasn't a man who admitted weakness easily. If he was calling me, the situation was dire. Who's missing?" I asked, already reaching for my notebook. Eleanor Whitman, 52. Real estate mogul, philanthropist, unofficial queen of Millhaven society. Disappeared from her own charity gala last night without a trace. No ransom demand, no signs of struggle, just gone. Security footage shows her walking to her private office at 9:42 p.m. She never came out. And the political angle? Ray hesitated. Eleanor was financing Mayor Caldwell's re-election campaign. Generous donations, fundraising events, the works. But rumor has it she was also sitting on information that could tank his career. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. This town runs on Whitman money, and Eleanor had dirt on everyone who matters. I rubbed my temples, feeling the familiar tingle of a complex case taking root in my mind. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't let anyone touch her office or personal effects. There's one more thing, Marcus, Ray added, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Eleanor's daughter, Lily, was found unconscious in the garden around the same time her mother disappeared. She has no memory of what happened, but her hands were covered in soil and blood. The lab confirms it's not hers. I felt my breath catch. Eleanor's? We don't know yet. But the blood type matches. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different from the others. More personal somehow. I had no idea just how right that instinct would prove to be. Have you ever had that moment of dread when you realize you're walking into something far more dangerous than anticipated? I wonder, would you have taken the case knowing what lay ahead? Or would you, like me, be unable to resist the pull of a mystery that needs solving regardless of the cost? Arrival in Millhaven. The drive to Millhaven took 3 hours, winding through miles of forest before the road opened up to reveal the town nestled against the shoreline of Lake Serenity. Despite its name, there was nothing serene about the atmosphere when I arrived. News vans lined the main street, and clusters of worried locals gathered on corners, their conversations hushing as I drove past. The police station was a modest brick building that looked more suited to handling parking violations than a high-profile disappearance. Inside, I found Ray looking like he hadn't slept in days, surrounded by maps, witness statements, and coffee cups. "Thank God you're here," he said, clasping my hand firmly. "This thing's about to explode." "Walk me through it," I said, shrugging off my jacket in the stuffy office. Ray pointed to a large map of the Whitman estate pinned to the wall. The gala was in full swing, about 200 guests, all of Millhaven's elite, plus some big shots from the city. Around 9:30, Eleanor excused herself from a conversation with Mayor Caldwell, saying she needed to make a quick call. Security footage shows her entering her study at 9:42. That's the last confirmed sighting. The security system? State of the art. Cameras covering every entrance and exit. Motion sensors, the works. Nothing was triggered. No footage was tampered with. It's like she vanished into thin air. I raised an eyebrow. Nobody vanishes into thin air, Ray. What about the daughter, Lily? Ray's expression darkened. 28 years old, only child. Works for her mother's company, but word is they've been at odds lately. Around 10:15, a guest found her unconscious near the rose garden, clothes disheveled, hands dirty with soil and blood. Medical exam showed no signs of assault, just a mild concussion. Toxicology found traces of a sedative in her system. And her memory? Claims the last thing she remembers is walking outside for some air around 9:30. Everything after that is blank. I made a note. Memory loss could be genuine trauma. Drugs or a combination of both could cause it. But it could also be convenient. I need to see the scene and talk to Lily, I said. And I'll need access to Eleanor's personal records, communications, everything. Ray nodded, looking relieved to hand over some of the burden. I've arranged for you to stay at the Lakeview Inn. The owner's discreet. I've also set up an interview with Lily at the Whitman estate in 2 hours. As we walked out, I noticed a striking woman watching us from across the street. Mid-50s, elegantly dressed, with a calculating gaze that seemed to take my measure. Victoria Hargrove, Ray muttered. Eleanor's best friend and business partner. Also the executor of her estate if anything happens to her. I filed that information away. In my experience, those closest to the victim often hold the keys to the mystery there as witnesses or perpetrators. What do you think happened, Ray? I asked as we reached my car. He looked out at the deceptively peaceful lake before answering. I think someone in this town wanted Eleanor Whitman gone badly enough to risk everything. And I think that whoever it is, they're watching us right now, wondering if they left anything behind that could lead us to them. As I drove toward the Whitman estate, I couldn't shake his words. In picturesque towns like Millhaven, the most dangerous predators are often hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of respectability. I had to wonder, if you lived in a community like this, how well would you really know your neighbors, your friends, your family? The Whitman Estate. The Whitman Estate was a modern architectural masterpiece of glass and stone perched on a bluff overlooking the lake. As I navigated the winding driveway, I noted the extensive security measures cameras disguised as landscape lighting, sensor-equipped fencing, and a gatehouse manned by a private security guard who checked my credentials thoroughly before allowing me to pass. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, which made Eleanor's disappearance all the more baffling. I was greeted at the door by a stern-faced woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Mrs. Plain. Abernathy, the housekeeper. "Miss Lily is waiting for you in the solarium," she said, her voice carrying the faint traces of a Scottish accent. "She's not well, Detective. Please, be gentle with your questions." The interior of the home was just as impressive as its exterior, soaring ceilings, museum-quality artwork, and furnishings that probably cost more than my annual salary. But what struck me most was the feeling of emptiness, as if the space had been designed for show rather than comfort. I found Lily Whitman sitting in a glass-enclosed room filled with tropical plants, staring out at the lake. She was slender, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and hands that couldn't seem to stay still, constantly adjusting her watch or smoothing her already immaculate slacks. "Miss Whitman," I said, "I'm Detective Shernan. I'd like to ask you some questions about your mother's disappearance." She turned to face me, and I was struck by the haunted look in her eyes. Not just grief or worry, but something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "I've already told the police everything I know," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Which isn't much. I understand," I said, taking a seat across from her. "Sometimes, though, going over the details again can trigger memories we didn't know we had. Walk me through that evening, starting with when you last saw your mother." Lily's gaze drifted back to the lake. The party was in full swing. Mother was doing her usual routine, charming the mayor, flattering the wealthy donors, playing the perfect hostess. Around 9:15, I saw her looking tense after a conversation with Victor Blackwood. Victor Blackwood? A developer from the city? Mother refused to sell him a prime piece of lakefront property he wanted for a resort project. He was insistent. They argued at the edge of the terrace, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I made a note, and after that, she spoke briefly with Mayor Caldwell, then headed inside. I went to the bar for another drink. That's the last thing I remember clearly until waking up in the hospital with the police questioning me. "What about your relationship with your mother?" I understand there was some tension. Her jaw tightened perceptibly. "Who told you that?" "It's my job to gather information, Miss Whitman." Was there tension? Lily was silent for a long moment. "My mother was a complicated woman, Detective. Brilliant in business, generous with her charity work, but difficult in personal relationships. She liked control. Over her company, over this town, over me. Recently, I'd been pushing for more autonomy in the business, maybe even striking out on my own. She didn't take it well. Badly enough that you might have wanted to harm her?" I asked, watching her reaction carefully. "No." The word burst out of her. "God, no. We fought, but she was still my mother. I would never." Her voice faltered. "I just don't understand why I was found outside. What happened to me? It terrifies me that I might have seen something, might know something that could help find her, but I can't remember." There was genuine distress in her voice, but my years as a detective had taught me that the most convincing liars often believe their own stories. "I'd like your permission to see your mother's study and access her personal files," I said. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Abernathy will show you. But, Detective? Her eyes met mine directly for the first time. My mother had enemies. More than I probably know about. Be careful what you go looking for. As I followed Mrs. Abernathy through the house, I pondered Lily's warning. In my experience, those who accumulate wealth and power inevitably accumulate enemies along the way. But which one of Eleanor's enemies had crossed the line from resentment to action? And was Lily's amnesia genuine or a convenient cover for something darker? I want to ask, have you ever had a gap in your memory, a period of time that's just missing? How far would you trust someone who claimed they couldn't remember their actions during a critical moment? And more importantly, how far would you trust yourself if you were in Lily's position? The study Eleanor Whitman's study was a testament to power and precision. Unlike the rest of the house, which felt like a showpiece designed to impress, this room had the lived-in quality of a space where real work happened. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface organized with military precision. One wall was lined with leather-bound books, while another displayed framed photographs of Eleanor with various politicians and celebrities. The room had been processed by the local crime scene unit, but they'd found nothing obvious, no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of forced entry or exit. The window overlooked a sheer drop to rocky shoreline 50 feet below, making it an impossible escape route. "Mrs. Abernathy," I said, "how long have you worked for the Whitman family?" The housekeeper stood rigid in the doorway, unwilling or unable to step fully into the room. 26 years, since Miss Lily was a small child, and in that time did Mrs. Whitman ever just disappear? Take an unplanned trip, perhaps? She looked offended at the suggestion. Never. Mrs. Whitman's schedule was planned months in advance. She would never leave without preparation, especially not during her own event. What about enemies? Miss Lily mentioned there were people who might wish her mother harm. Mrs. Abernathy's face tightened. Mrs. Whitman was a powerful woman who made difficult decisions. Not everyone appreciated that. "I need names, Mrs. Abernathy." She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. Victor Blackwood, for one. Mrs. Whitman blocked his resort development, which cost him millions. Then there's Mayor Caldwell, devoted in public, but they argued fiercely in private over the direction of the town's development. And Victoria Hargrove, her business partner? I prompted when she trailed off. And oldest friend. But recently, there were disagreements. I overheard them arguing last month. Something about old promises and buried secrets. Mrs. Hargrove said, "Some graves shouldn't be disturbed, Ellie, even by you." I didn't understand what she meant. I filed that cryptic statement away for later examination. What about Lily? Would you characterize her relationship with her mother as troubled? Mrs. Abernathy's loyalty clearly warred with honesty before she answered. They loved each other, but didn't always understand each other. Mrs. Whitman wanted Miss Lily to follow in her footsteps exactly. Miss Lily wanted to forge her own path. The tension had been building for years. One last question. Did Mrs. Whitman keep any private records? A journal, perhaps, or files that weren't part of the company's official documents? Something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or concern. Mrs. Whitman was meticulous about documentation, she said carefully. She often said that in business and in life, leverage came from knowing things others didn't. There's a safe behind that painting of the lake. I don't know the combination, but Miss Lily might. As Mrs. Abernathy left, I turned my attention to the desk. The surface contained nothing of interest: a calendar showing appointments, a few business magazines, an expensive fountain pen. The drawers were locked, but a skilled investigator learned certain tricks over the years. Within minutes, I had them open. The contents were mostly mundane office supplies, business documents, a few personal items. But in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false bottom that I nearly missed, I found a leather-bound journal. The most recent entry was dated the day before Eleanor's disappearance. VH.com. is becoming a liability. After all these years, her conscience chooses now to make an appearance? I won't allow sentimentality to destroy everything we've built. The Robertson property will proceed as planned. Some secrets need to stay buried, quite literally. I stared at the words, feeling the first real tingle of a lead. VH had to be Victoria Hargrove. And what was the Robertson property? What secrets did it hold? My contemplation was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass, followed by a heavy thud from somewhere below. I instinctively reached for my weapon as I moved quickly toward the door. "Mrs. Abernathy?" I called out. "Lily?" No response. The hallway was empty as I made my way toward the staircase, every sense alert for danger. I could hear voices now raised in what sounded like argument coming from the direction of the solarium. Have you ever had that moment of perfect clarity in the midst of chaos? That instant when you know something is fundamentally wrong, but you're walking toward it anyway? As I descended those stairs, I felt that familiar mix of dread and determination. Would you have hesitated? Turned back? Or would you, like me, have been driven forward by the need to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be? The confrontation. I moved silently through the house, following the sounds of conflict. As I approached the solarium, the voices became clearer Lily's, pitched high with fear or anger, and a male voice I didn't recognize, deep and insistent. "Told you to stay away," Lily was saying. "If Detective Sherman finds out what?" I said, stepping into the doorway, hand still resting near my weapon. They both whirled toward me. Lily looked stricken, her earlier composure shattered. Beside her stood a man in his 30s, tall and athletic, with the kind of polished good looks that suggest old money and expensive education. "Detective," Lily stammered. This is David Robertson. He's a friend. Robertson. The name from Eleanor's journal. The property she'd mentioned in connection with secrets that needed to stay buried. "Mr. Robertson," I said, my tone deliberately neutral. Interesting timing for a social call. He straightened his posture, shifting into a defensive stance I've seen countless times from people with something to hide. "I came as soon as I heard about Eleanor. Lily and I are close. I wanted to make sure she was okay." "Close enough that you'd break a window to get in when no one answered the door?" His expression flickered with surprise. "The French doors were unlocked. I just pushed too hard and the glass cracked." "I'll pay for the damage, of course." I turned to Lily. "You didn't mention Mr. Robertson during our conversation." "You didn't ask," she replied, a hint of defiance returning to her voice. "David and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. Mother didn't approve, so we kept it private." "And why didn't your mother approve?" I asked, looking at Robertson. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You'd have to ask her that." "I would if I could, Mr. Robertson. Unfortunately, she's missing, and I'm trying to understand why. Perhaps you could tell me about your family property, the one Eleanor Whitman was interested in?" The change in the room was instant and palpable. Lily took a step back, confusion evident on her face, while Robertson's expression hardened into something close to hatred. "Where did you hear about that?" he demanded. "I'm asking the questions here, Mr. Robertson. What's special about your family's property that would interest Eleanor Whitman?" David looked at Lily, who shook her head slightly in apparent confusion. He seemed to come to some decision. "The Robertson estate has been in my family for 5 generations, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "It includes the largest undeveloped shoreline on Lake Serenity, 3 miles of pristine waterfront. Developers have been after it for decades, but my grandfather refused all offers. When he died last year, Eleanor immediately approached me with a partnership proposal. When I refused, she began applying pressure." "What kind of pressure?" I asked. "Financial at first. She used her influence with local banks to call in loans my family had taken out for improvements on the property. Then it got personal. She started digging into my family's history, implying she'd found something that could complicate my inheritance if made public. And had she?" His expression darkened further. My family has owned that land honestly for generations." "That's not what I asked." Our standoff was interrupted by Mrs. Abernathy's arrival, her normally composed face flushed with agitation. "Miss Lily," she said, pointedly ignoring Robertson. "The police are here. They say they need to speak with you immediately." Through the windows, I could see several police cars pulling up, lights flashing but sirens silent. Ray emerged from the lead vehicle, his expression grim, accompanied by 2 officers I didn't recognize. "What's going on?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what was happening. "They've found something," I said. "Stay here. I'll talk to them." As I walked out to meet Ray, I processed what I'd just learned. The Robertson property seemed central to whatever was happening. Eleanor had been applying pressure, using something from the family's past as leverage. And now, David Robertson had appeared at the Whitman estate, possibly breaking in, just as I was investigating. Too many coincidences for my comfort. "Ray," I greeted him as I reached the driveway. "What have you got?" His face was ashen. "We found blood, Marcus. A lot of it. Hidden under fresh soil in the gardening shed at the edge of the property. Lab ran a preliminary match against samples from Eleanor's hairbrush. It's hers. And there's more." He handed me an evidence bag containing a small silver object. This was buried with the blood. It's a monogrammed cufflink. The initials are Dr. David Robertson. I looked back at the house, where Robertson and Lily were now visible through the windows, deep in urgent conversation. "There's a warrant for his arrest in my car," Ray said quietly, "and we need to talk to Lily again. The gardening tools in that shed had her fingerprints all over them. The pieces were starting to form a pattern blood, soil on Lily's hands, her memory loss, the suspicious arrival of David Robertson, the cufflink. But something still didn't fit. If this was a simple case of lovers conspiring to eliminate an interfering mother, why was Eleanor's journal focused on Victoria Hargrove and the Robertson property? What were the secrets that needed to stay buried? I turned back to Ray. "We need to bring them both in, but carefully. And I want to know everything about the history of the Robertson property. There's something there we're missing, something important enough to kill for." As we approached the house, I couldn't help wondering what I would find in the tangled relationships of these wealthy, secretive people. In my experience, the most dangerous secrets are those that have been kept the longest. What had been buried on that property? And who else might be willing to kill to keep it hidden? If you discovered a terrible secret about someone you loved, would you protect them? Or would you seek justice, no matter the personal cost? It's easy to believe we know the answer until we're actually facing that choice. The interrogation. The Millhaven police station's interview room was Spartan and windowless, designed to focus attention on the subject across the table. David Robertson sat rigidly in his chair, his expensive suit incongruous against the institutional setting. His lawyer, a sharpied woman in her 50s who had arrived with remarkable speed, sat beside him. "Mr. Robertson," I began, "you were found at the Whitman estate shortly after we discovered evidence potentially connecting you to Eleanor Whitman's disappearance. Would you like to explain the blood in the gardening shed and how your cufflink ended up there?" "My client has no knowledge of any blood or evidence in any gardening shed," his lawyer interjected smoothly. "Nor can you prove when or how the cufflink came to be there, if it is indeed his. Is it yours?" I asked Robertson directly. He glanced at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. "Yes," he admitted. "I have a set of silver cufflinks with my initials. I noticed one was missing about a week ago. I assumed I'd lost it somewhere." "A week ago," I repeated. "When were you last at the Whitman estate before today?" Another glance at his lawyer. "Last Thursday. I met Lily for dinner. We ate on the terrace." "Did you go anywhere near the gardening shed?" "No. We stayed at the house." "Can anyone corroborate that?" "Mrs. Abernathy served our dinner. She can confirm we remained on the terrace." I made a note to re-interview the housekeeper. "Let's talk about your relationship with Eleanor Whitman." You stated earlier that she was pressuring you about your family property. How far did that conflict go? Robertson's jaw tightened. I disliked her methods, but I would never harm her. What exactly did she find in your family's history that she was using as leverage? The lawyer started to object, but Robertson held up a hand to stop her. Detective, my family has owned that land since 1897. During the 1920s, when Prohibition was in full swing, my great-grandfather allowed certain business interests to use a secluded cove on our property for smuggling operations. In exchange, he received considerable financial compensation, which saved the estate during the Depression. Eleanor somehow discovered documentation of these arrangements and suggested that the property could be seized under modern racketeering laws if this history became known to authorities. Was she right? I asked. His lawyer answered this time, no. The statute of limitations has long since expired on any crimes committed during Prohibition. Mrs. Whitman was bluffing, but the publicity could have damaged the Robertson family name. It seemed like a motive, but a relatively weak one. Reputation damage hardly seemed worth committing murder over, especially for someone of Robertson's wealth and standing. What about your relationship with Lily Whitman? Eleanor didn't approve. Why? Something shifted in Robertson's expression, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through his controlled facade. Eleanor claimed it was because of business conflicts, but that wasn't the real reason. And what was the real reason? He hesitated, then said, Eleanor believed no one was good enough for her daughter. She controlled every aspect of Lily's life, her education, her career, even her social circle. Our relationship was the first thing Lily had chosen entirely for herself, against her mother's wishes. Eleanor couldn't stand that loss of control. Enough motive for Lily to want her mother gone? Absolutely not, he said firmly. Lily would never harm anyone, least of all her mother. Despite their differences, she desperately wanted Eleanor's approval. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. One last question, Mr. Robertson. Where were you the night Eleanor disappeared? Between 9:30 and 11:00 p.m. At the Hargrove Gallery downtown. Victoria Hargrove was hosting an exclusive showing for select clients. I was there the entire time, as dozens of witnesses can confirm. Victoria Hargrove again. The business partner Eleanor had argued with about graves that shouldn't be disturbed. The person referred to as VH in Eleanor's journal and called a liability. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Robertson, I said, rising from my chair. Please remain available for further questions. In the hallway, Ray was waiting for me. Lily Whitman is set up in interview room B with her attorney. Preliminary forensics report just came in. The blood in the shed is definitely Eleanor's, and there was enough of it that... Well, it doesn't look good for her chances of being found alive. I nodded grimly. What about the soil samples from Lily's hands and clothes the night she was found? Matches the soil from the shed. And there's more. The sedative in her system was lorazepam. She has a prescription for it. Claims she takes it for anxiety. Convenient, I murmured. She could have taken it herself to support a claim of being drugged and memory loss. That's what I'm thinking, Ray agreed. But there's something off about all this. The cufflink feels too obvious, like it was planted. And if Lily and Robertson were working together, why would she leave evidence pointing to him? Maybe they weren't working together, I said slowly, the pieces rearranging themselves in my mind. Maybe one is being set up to take the fall for the other. Or maybe they're both being set up by someone else entirely. I thought about the journal entry again. Victoria Hargrove, the Robertson property. Secrets that needed to stay buried. I need to talk to Victoria Hargrove after I finish with Lily, I told Ray. And I want to know exactly what kind of hold Eleanor Whitman had over this town. Not the public story, the real power dynamics. Who owed her? Who feared her? Who stood to benefit from her disappearance? You think this goes beyond a family dispute or a business rivalry? Ray asked. I think, I said carefully, that in small towns like this, The surface story is rarely the whole truth. And I think Eleanor Whitman knew something dangerous, something worth killing to keep hidden. As I walked toward the room where Lily waited, I considered how many lives in Millhaven were entangled with Eleanor Whitman's. In my experience, wealth doesn't just buy luxury, it buys silence, compliance, and loyalty until it doesn't. When the powerful fall, they rarely fall alone. I wonder, if you lived in a town like Millhaven, how much would you be willing to overlook to maintain your position? And how far would you go to protect yourself if the foundations of that position were threatened? The reversal Lily Whitman looked even more fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interview room. Her attorney, a grandfatherly man with a gentle demeanor that I suspected concealed a shark-like legal mind, sat protectively close to her. "Miss Whitman," I began, "we found evidence that concerns us greatly. Your mother's blood was discovered in the gardening shed on your property, along with a cufflink belonging to David Robertson. The soil on your hands and clothes the night you were found matches the soil from that shed." Lily's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I think it is," I continued. "I think your memory loss may be convenient rather than genuine. The lorazepam in your system, you have a prescription for it, don't you?" Her attorney raised a hand. "Detective, if you're accusing my client of something, please be direct. I'm trying to understand what happened that night," I said, keeping my eyes on Lily. "The evidence suggests a scenario where you could have been involved in your mother's disappearance and possible death. The deteriorating relationship between you two, your desire for independence, your secret relationship with a man she disapproved of, it creates a compelling narrative." "No," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "No, that's wrong. I would never hurt my mother." "Then help me understand. Why would your mother's blood be in that shed? Why would David Robertson's cufflink be there? Why were you found unconscious with soil and blood on your hands?" Lily closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, I saw something new there, not fear or guilt, but determination. "Detective Shernan, I believe someone is trying to frame me," she said deliberately. "And possibly David as well. That's a convenient explanation," I noted. "Do you have any evidence to support it?" "Not evidence, exactly. But I've been having flashes, fragments of memory from that night. I didn't mention them before because they didn't make sense, and I wasn't sure if they were real or just my mind trying to fill in the gaps." "What kind of fragments?" Her attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Lily shook her head. "No, I need to tell him." She turned back to me. "I remember walking in the garden, needing some air because the party was overwhelming. I remember seeing light from a phone screen in the darkness near the shed. I approached, thinking maybe one of the guests had wandered off, and I remember a voice saying my name. A familiar voice, but I can't place it. After that, nothing until I woke up in the hospital. Why didn't you share this earlier? Because it sounds crazy." Frustration edged into her voice. "A disembodied voice, a light in the darkness. Sounds like I'm making it up, and maybe I am. Maybe my brain is creating false memories to fill the void. But I know one thing with absolute certainty, Detective. I did not harm my mother. I studied her carefully. Either she was telling the truth or she was an exceptional actress. In this job, you develop a sense for deception, but it's far from infallible. Let's approach this from another angle," I said. "Your mother's journal mentioned Victoria Hargrove becoming a liability and referred to secrets that needed to stay buried on the Robertson property. What do you know about that?" Confusion crossed Lily's face. "Victoria? She and my mother have been friends since college. They started the real estate company together, though mother eventually became the controlling partner. I know they've had disagreements recently about a new development, but Victoria becoming a liability? That doesn't make sense. What about the Robertson property? Did your mother ever mention anything specific about it to you?" Lily hesitated. "Not directly, but about a month ago, I overheard her on the phone. She was saying something about how what happened in 1972 changes everything. She sounded excited, almost triumphant. When she realized I was listening, she hung up immediately. 1,972, I repeated. Do you know what might have happened that year? No idea. I wasn't born yet, but whatever it was, it seemed important to her. I made a note. 1,972 would have been well after the Prohibition era that Robertson had mentioned. So whatever Eleanor had discovered, it wasn't just about bootlegging operations from the 1920s. One last question, Miss Whitman. If you were going to look for something your mother wanted to keep hidden, something important enough that she wouldn't trust it to her office or home, where would you look? Lily thought for a moment. There's a safe deposit box at Millhaven First National. She never told me what was in it, but I know she visited it periodically. And she paused. There's a cabin in the woods at the edge of our property, near the border with the Robertson land. It was my grandfather's hunting lodge. Mother kept it exactly as it was when he died, like a shrine. She went there sometimes when she needed to think. That was something we could act on immediately. Thank you, Miss Whitman. I'll be in touch if I have more questions. As I stood to leave, she reached out suddenly and gripped my wrist. Detective Shernan, please find out what happened to my mother. Whether she's alive or not, I need to know the truth, even if it's painful. The desperation in her eyes seemed genuine, but in my line of work, I've seen the most convincing performances from the least expected sources. Outside the interview room, I found Ray waiting again. We got the warrant for the safe deposit box, he said, and I've got officers ready to check out the cabin. Good. I still want to talk to Victoria Hargrove, I said. And I need someone to research what might have happened in this town in 1972 that could be connected to the Robertson property. Ray nodded. I'll put someone on it. What's your read on Lily? I considered the question carefully. Either she's innocent and being framed, or she's one of the most skilled liars I've ever encountered. I'm not ready to make that call yet. As we walked toward the exit, one of the desk officers called out to Ray. Chief, there's someone here insisting on seeing Detective Shernan. Says it's urgent. We turned to see Mrs. Abernathy, the Whitman housekeeper, standing rigidly by the front desk. When she saw me, she clutched her handbag tighter and stepped forward. Detective, she said, her Scottish accent more pronounced with stress. There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you earlier, but I was afraid. What is it, Mrs. Abernathy? She glanced around nervously. Not here, please. Ray pointed to an empty conference room, and we followed Mrs. Abernathy inside. Once the door was closed, she reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. Mrs. Whitman gave this to me 3 weeks ago, she said, her hands trembling slightly. She said if anything ever happened to her, I was to give it to the police. Only the police, not Miss Lily, not anyone else. I was going to bring it forward right away when she disappeared. But then, she faltered. Then what? I prompted gently. Then I received a phone call. The person knew I had this envelope. They said if I gave it to anyone, Miss Lily would be in danger. I was terrified. But after hearing about the blood, about Miss Lily being suspected, I had to come forward. She handed me the envelope. It was sealed with wax, imprinted with what appeared to be Eleanor's personal seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with elegant handwriting. If you are reading this, I am likely dead or in serious danger. Do not trust Victoria Hargrove or Mayor Caldwell. What happened at Robertson's Cove in 1972 was not an accident, and I have proof. Look for a red box hidden beneath the floorboards in my grandfather's cabin. The truth has been buried long enough. It was signed simply Eleanor Whitman with a date from 3 weeks ago. I looked up at Mrs. Abernathy. Did you read this? She shook her head. No, sir. The seal was intact when I gave it to you. Do you know what happened at Robertson's Cove in 1972? No, sir. I didn't move to Millhaven until the 1990s. Who called and threatened you? Did you recognize the voice? She looked down. No, it was distorted, like they were using something to change it. Thank you for coming forward, I said. We'll need a formal statement, and you should stay somewhere safe tonight, not at the Whitman estate. After arranging for protection for Mrs. Abernathy, I turned to Ray, holding up the letter. I think it's time we checked out that cabin, I said. And I want to know exactly where Mayor Caldwell and Victoria Hargrove were the night Eleanor disappeared. As we headed for our vehicles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something much larger than a missing person case or even a murder. Eleanor Whitman had been preparing for something, anticipating danger. What had she discovered about an event from nearly 50 years ago that was worth killing for today? I've often found that the most dangerous secrets are the ones that have had decades to fester buried, but not forgotten, like bodies in shallow graves just waiting for a hard rain to expose them to the light. Would you want to know a terrible truth about your town, your family, your history? Or would you prefer some secrets remain buried? In my experience, the truth has a way of emerging whether we want it to or not. The only choice we really have is how we face it when it does. The revelation. The Whitman cabin was far less grand than the Mansiona rustic Tworum structure built of logs and stone, nestled among towering pines at the edge of the property. As Ray and I approached, accompanied by 2 officers, the setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, giving the scene an ominous quality. Place looks undisturbed, Ray noted as we examined the exterior. The door was locked, no windows were broken, and a fine layer of undisturbed dust covered the porch. Using the key Lily had provided, we entered cautiously. The interior was a time capsule from an earlier era-mounted animal heads on the walls, heavy wooden furniture, a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A thick layer of dust covered everything except, I noticed, a small writing desk near the window. Someone had been here recently. Check for the floorboards, I instructed the officers while I examined the desk. The drawers contained only old stationery and pens, but the blotter on top showed impressions from recent writing. Someone had written a note here in the last few days, pressing hard enough to leave marks on the pages below. I took out a pencil and lightly rubbed it across the top sheet of paper, an old detective's trick. Slowly, words began to appear, a list of names. VH, RC, TR, BM, JL, all present that night. All complicit, all benefited from silence. The initials VH almost certainly referred to Victoria Hargrove. RC could be Mayor Robert Caldwell. The others remained mysteries for the moment. Detective. One of the officers called from the bedroom. I found something. In the small bedroom, the officer had pulled back an old rag rug to reveal a section of floorboards that looked newer than the rest. Using a pry bar, we carefully lifted them to expose a hidden compartment underneath. Inside was a red metal box, exactly as Eleanor's letter had described. It was locked, but the lock was flimsy. I used the pry bar to break it open. The contents made my breath catch. Photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, a cassette tape, and a small leather-bound journal. I carefully lifted the top photograph. It showed a group of young people, probably in their late teens or early 20s, gathered on a dock by the lake. They were smiling, holding drinks, clearly celebrating something. The photo was dated July 4, 1972 on the back. I recognized younger versions of faces. I knew Victoria Hargrove, unmistakable even in her youth, a man who had to be Mayor Caldwell with a full head of hair, and, in the center of the group, a striking young woman who bore a strong resemblance to Lily Whitman. This had to be Eleanor in her youth. The newspaper clippings told a darker story. The headline from the Millhaven Tribune, dated July 6, 1972, read, "Tragedy at Lake Serenity. Local teen drowns during Independence Day celebration." The article detailed how Thomas Robertson, 18, had accidentally drowned while swimming at night after a party on his family's property. His body had been recovered the following day. Thomas Robertson, The name hit me like a physical blow. This had to be a relative of David Robertson, perhaps an uncle or older cousin. The journal appeared to be Eleanor's, with entries dating back to 1972. I flipped to the entry for July 4th of that year. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It was just a prank. Tom was showing off again, acting like he owned the lake just because his family owned the shore. When he passed out drunk, RC suggested we teach him a lesson. We took the boat out to the middle of the lake with him unconscious. The plan was to leave him there to wake up confused and have to row back in embarrassment. But when we got there, TR woke up and started fighting with RC. He fell overboard. We were all drunk, laughing at first, thinking he was faking. By the time we realized he really couldn't swim, it was too late. The current was strong and the water so dark. He went under and never came back up. We all agreed a pact of silence. We were scared, just kids, really. We said he must have gone swimming alone and drowned. No one questioned it. His family was devastated, but they accepted the explanation. We've carried this secret for a month now, and I don't know how much longer I can bear it. I looked up at Ray, my mind racing. Thomas Robertson drowned in 1972, and these young people, including Eleanor Whitman, Victoria Hargrove, and Robert Caldwell, were responsible. They covered it up, and they've kept that secret for nearly 50 years. Jesus, Ray muttered. But why would Eleanor break the silence now? And how does this connect to her disappearance? I turned to the most recent entries in the journal. The final one was dated just 3 weeks ago. David Robertson came to me today about the property again. Seeing him so like Thomas in the eyes and the stubborn set of his jaw, it all came flooding back. The guilt I've carried all these years. The silence we all swore to maintain. But keeping this secret has allowed Robert and Victoria to build their lives, their fortunes, their reputations on a foundation of lies. They've exploited the Robertson family for decades, using their influence to gradually take control of parcels of their land through manipulated zoning laws and economic pressure. I was complicit in this, I admit it freely, but meeting Lily changed everything. Seeing her fall in love with David, the nephew of the boy we let drown, it's like fate's twisted joke, or perhaps its path to redemption. I tried to keep them apart at first, terrified that the truth would emerge. But I can't continue this charade. I've decided to tell David everything about his Uncle Thomas, about our role in his death, and about how Victoria and Robert have systematically worked to take control of his family's legacy out of some perverse need to own the place where our crime occurred. Perhaps to control the narrative, perhaps out of guilt. I know they won't allow this. Victoria already suspects what I'm planning. Our argument last week made that clear. She reminded me of our pact, as if a promise made by terrified teenagers should bind us to silence forever. Robert was more direct in his threats, but I can't keep this secret any longer. Not with Lily's happiness at stake. If something happens to me, this record will serve as my confession and my accusation. The truth about Thomas Robertson's death was buried 50 years ago, and the powerful people who have built their lives on that lie will do anything to keep it hidden. But the truth demands to be heard. The implications were staggering. Eleanor Whitman had been planning to confess to a crime that implicated some of the most powerful people in Millhaven people, who had spent decades building their lives and reputations while systematically targeting the family of their victim. Her disappearance suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. We need to bring in Victoria Hargrove and Mayor Caldwell immediately, I told Ray. And we need to... My words were cut off by the crackle of the police radio. One of the officers stepped outside to respond, then returned with an urgent expression. "Chief," he said to Ray, "there's been a development." Victoria Hargrove just showed up at the station, saying she has information about Eleanor Whitman's disappearance. And sir, she's accusing Lily Whitman of being involved. I looked down at the evidence in my hands, the proof of a 50-year-old crime and cover-up that implicated Victoria Hargrove herself. This wasn't just a misdirection. It was a deliberate attempt to frame Eleanor's daughter for a crime Victoria had likely committed. "Tell them to hold her there," I instructed the officer. "Don't let her leave, but don't start questioning until we arrive." As we carefully packed up the crucial evidence, I turned to Ray. "She's making her move, trying to get ahead of us. She must have realized Eleanor kept records and is desperately trying to control the narrative. But why turn herself in?" Ray asked. "Why not run?" "Because she's played the long game for 50 years, I replied. "She knows that running would be an admission of guilt. Instead, she's doubling down, trying to frame Lily and probably David too. With both of them implicated, any accusations they might make against her would look like desperate attempts to shift blame." It was a calculated risk on Victoria's part, but a smart one. If she succeeded in casting enough suspicion on Lily and David, any evidence they presented about the old case would be tainted. The truth about Thomas Robertson's death, and likely Eleanor Whitman's as well, would remain buried. As we drove back toward town, the cassette tape from the box burned a hole in my pocket. We hadn't had time to listen to it yet, but I had a strong suspicion it contained audio evidence related to the 1972 incident, perhaps a recorded confession or conversation that Eleanor had preserved all these years as insurance. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture of decades-long deception, manipulation, and now murder, all to keep a terrible secret hidden. But one critical question remained unanswered. Was Eleanor Whitman still alive? The blood in the shed suggested otherwise, but I'd learned long ago never to make assumptions until all the evidence was in. I've seen how a single secret can poison countless lives, spreading its corruption across generations. The people of Millhaven thought they knew their community leaders, their history, the foundation their town was built upon. How many lives had been altered by what happened that night in 1972? How many decisions, large and small, had been influenced by this buried truth? If you discovered that your entire community was built on a lie, would you expose it, knowing the pain and disruption that would follow? Or would you, like those young people on the dock, choose the comfort of silence over the harsh light of truth? The confrontation Victoria Hargrove sat in the interview room with the confident posture of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. In her mid-60s, she had the kind of polished elegance that comes from decades of wealth and social power. Nothing in her demeanor suggested a woman under suspicion, quite the opposite. She looked like she was chairing a board meeting. I entered alone, deliberately taking my time arranging the folder I carried before sitting down across from her. Let her wait, let her wonder what I knew. In interviews, patience and silence are often more effective tools than rapid-fire questions. "Mrs. Hargrove," I finally said, "I understand you have information regarding Eleanor Whitman's disappearance." Her smile was practiced, perfect. "Yes, Detective Shernan. This has been weighing on me heavily, but after much reflection, I believe I need to come forward with what I know, painful as it is." "And what do you know?" I asked neutrally. "I believe Lily Whitman was involved in her mother's disappearance," she stated, maintaining direct eye contact. "Eleanor and I have been friends for over 40 years. We've had our professional disagreements, but she confided in me about her troubled relationship with Lily. In recent months, it had deteriorated significantly. How so? Lily resented her mother's control over the company and her personal life. Eleanor refused to approve of Lily's relationship with David Robertson, which created tremendous tension. Last week, Eleanor told me she was planning to change her will, removing Lily as her primary heir and placing the majority of her estate in a charitable trust. Lily somehow found out and was furious. "That's a compelling story," I commented. "Is there more?" Victoria leaned forward slightly. "The night Eleanor disappeared, I saw Lily arguing with her mother on the terrace around 9:15. It was heated. Eleanor looked upset when she walked away. Later, around 10:00, I noticed Lily wasn't at the party. I went looking for her and saw her walking from the direction of the garden shed. She seemed disoriented, and there was. Something dark on her hands. I thought it was dirt at the time. Why didn't you report this immediately when Eleanor was first reported missing? I asked. I wanted to believe it was innocent, Victoria said, with a perfect note of regret in her voice. Lily is like family to me. I couldn't bear to think, but with the evidence mounting, I can't stay silent any longer. I nodded thoughtfully, letting silence fill the space between us. Then I opened the folder and placed the photograph from 1972 on the table the group of young people on the dock, including Victoria and Eleanor. Tell me about Thomas Robertson, I said quietly. The change in Victoria Hargrove was subtle, but unmistakably a momentary freezing of her expression before she recovered. I'm not sure how a photograph from nearly 50 years ago relates to Eleanor's disappearance, she said, her voice impressively steady. I think it relates directly, I replied. Thomas Robertson drowned that night. The official story was that he went swimming alone while intoxicated. But that's not what really happened, is it, Victoria? Her eyes hardened, though her composed expression barely changed. Ancient history, detective. A tragic accident from when we were practically children ourselves. I don't see the relevance. I placed the journal entry on the table next to the photograph. Eleanor kept records, detailed ones, about what really happened that night, about the pact of silence you all made, and about how you and Mayor Caldwell have spent decades systematically targeting the Robertson family's assets. She was planning to tell David Robertson everything about his uncle's death and about how his family has been manipulated by the very people responsible for Thomas's death. For the first time, genuine emotion cracked Victoria's facade. She had no right, she whispered, then immediately composed herself. Detective, whatever Eleanor wrote in her private journal is hardly evidence. People write fiction all the time, especially someone like Eleanor, who had become increasingly erratic and paranoid in recent months. We also have this, I said, placing a third item on the tablet transcript we'd hurriedly prepared from the cassette tape found in the red box. Eleanor recorded a conversation between herself, you, and Mayor Caldwell just last month. You explicitly threatened her when she said she was going to come clean about Thomas Robertson. Victoria's eyes darted to the transcript, and for a moment, real fear showed on her face. Then, she made her decision. I want my lawyer, she said calmly. Of course, I replied, gathering up the items and returning them to the folder. We'll pause this interview while you contact legal representation. But before I go, I should mention that we've just executed a search warrant for your home and office. And Mayor Caldwell is being brought in for questioning as we speak. I stood to leave, then turned back. One last thing, Mrs. Hargrove. Is Eleanor Whitman still alive? For a moment, I thought I saw something like regret pass across her face. I have no idea what happened to Eleanor, she said. That's the truth. I wasn't sure I believed her, but I nodded and left the room. Outside, Ray was waiting with another officer. She's calling her lawyer, I told them. Keep a close eye on her. I need to check on the search team at her house. As I headed for my car, my phone rang. It was one of the officers leading the search at Victoria's lakefront home. Detective Shernan, you need to get over here, he said urgently. We found something in the boathouse. What is it? I asked, already starting the car. Blood, he replied. A lot of it. And signs of recent cleaning. There's more. We found a woman's scarf caught in one of the mooring cleats. It matches the description of what Eleanor Whitman was wearing the night she disappeared. I pressed the accelerator, my mind racing. Secure the scene. I'm on my way. Victoria Hargrove's lakefront property was about a mile from the Whitman estate as the crow flies, but nearly 15 minutes by road. As I drove, I called Ray to update him. Keep Victoria isolated, I instructed. And when Mayor Caldwell arrives, put him in a separate room. Don't let them communicate. I think we're looking at a conspiracy that goes back 50 years, and they're both involved in Eleanor's disappearance. What about Lily and David Robertson? Ray asked. I believe they were being set up, I replied. The evidence against them was too convenient, too obvious. It's the kind of frame job someone with law enforcement knowledge might attempt. Like a mayor who oversees the police department, Ray said grimly. Exactly. How long until the dive team can search the lake near Victoria's boathouse? They're mobilizing now. Should be in the water within the hour. I ended the call as I pulled into Victoria's driveway. Her home was almost as impressive as the Whitman Estadia modernist structure of glass and stone with panoramic views of the lake. Officers were systematically searching the property, and evidence markers dotted the path leading to the boathouse. The officer in charge, a sergeant named Martinez, met me outside. This way, detective. We found significant blood evidence in the boathouse, primarily on and around the boat lift. Looks like someone tried to clean it, but they missed spots under the mechanism and along the edge of the dock. And here he pointed to a metal cleat used for tying up boats. We found this scarf snagged underneath. It was a silk scarf in deep emerald green, exactly matching the description of what Eleanor had been wearing the night of the gala. I examined it without touching, noting what appeared to be bloodstains and a tear that suggested it had been forcibly pulled. The blood pattern suggests the victim was either attacked here or brought here after an attack elsewhere, Martinez continued. The volume of blood indicates a serious, potentially fatal injury. I nodded grimly. What about the boat? That's another thing, Martinez said. According to neighbors, Mrs. Hargrove keeps a 22-foot cabin cruiser in this boathouse. It's not here. The harbor master confirms she took it out the night Eleanor Whitman disappeared and returned it early the next morning. She took a boat out after midnight in the dark? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Apparently so. Said she needed some air and time to think after the excitement of the gala. I looked out at the vast expanse of Lake Serenity. It was beautiful, but also deep and treacherous in places, with underwater caves and strong currents. A perfect place to make a body disappear. The dive team will focus their search here, I decided. And I want the forensics team to go over every inch of this boathouse. If Eleanor was killed here, I want proof that will stand up in court. As the team worked, I walked out onto the dock, thinking about the parallels between what had happened 50 years ago and now. A death on the lake, a cover-up, influential people protecting themselves at any cost, history repeating itself in the worst possible way. My phone rang again. This time it was the officer we'd left at the Whitman cabin. "Detective, we found something else," he said. "A hidden compartment we missed earlier, built into the chimney masonry. There's a USB drive inside, along with some sort of legal document." "What kind of document?" "It looks like a revised will, signed by Eleanor Whitman just 2 weeks ago. It leaves everything to Lily, but it also includes a sealed confession about something that happened in 1972. The instructions say the confession should be opened and made public in the event of her death." Eleanor had been planning for this, I realized. She'd known the risk she was taking by breaking the decades-long silence, and she'd carefully arranged for the truth to come out even if she wasn't there to tell it herself. "Bring everything to the station," I instructed, "and be careful. That evidence is probably the reason Eleanor Whitman was killed." As I headed back to my car, Martinez called out to me. "Detective, the dive team is here. They're ready to start the search." I looked at the darkening sky. Sunset was approaching, making an already difficult search even more challenging. "Tell them to focus on the area directly out from the boathouse, especially near the underwater rock formation about 100 yards out," I said. "That's where the current is strongest. If someone wanted to ensure a body stayed underwater, that's where they'd dispose of it." As I drove back to the station, I reflected on how quickly this case had evolved from a mysterious disappearance to a likely murder with roots stretching back half a century. Wealth, power, and the desperate need to protect a carefully constructed public image, these were motives as old as time. Eleanor Whitman had decided that truth and justice were more important than the comfortable life she'd built on a foundation of lies. That decision had likely cost her her life, but it might finally bring justice for Thomas Robertson after 50 long years. I've seen how the past never truly stays buried. It waits patiently, gathering power, until one day it erupts into the present with devastating force. No secret remains hidden forever, no matter how deeply it's buried or how carefully it's guarded. The only question is, who will be standing when the truth finally comes to light? Would you have the courage to face a terrible truth about your own past? To confess to a crime hidden for decades, knowing it might destroy everything you've built? Or would you, like Victoria Hargrove and Mayor Caldwell, do anything necessary to keep your secrets buried, even if it meant adding murder to your list of sins? The resolution. As darkness fell over Lake Serenity, the search for Eleanor Whitman intensified. The dive team worked under powerful floodlights, methodically exploring the murky depths near Victoria Hargrove's boathouse. Meanwhile, at the police station, a tense drama was unfolding. Mayor Robert Caldwell had arrived, flanked by his attorney, and projecting outraged innocence at being brought in for questioning. We had separated him from Victoria Hargrove, but I had no doubt they'd attempted to coordinate their stories before our investigation reached this point. I decided to interview the mayor myself, armed with the evidence we'd gathered. Unlike Victoria's composed demeanor, Caldwell was agitated, a thin veneer of righteous indignation barely concealing his anxiety. "This is outrageous," he began as soon as I entered the room. "I'm the mayor of this town. You can't possibly think I had anything to do with Eleanor's disappearance." "This isn't just about Eleanor's disappearance," I replied calmly, setting down a folder identical to the one I'd shown Victoria. "It's about Thomas Robertson's death in 1972 and the 50-year cover-up that followed." The mayor's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, placed a restraining hand on his arm when he started to respond. "My client has no comment about events from 50 years ago. If you have specific questions about Mrs. Whitman's current situation, please ask them directly." I nodded and opened the folder, removing the transcript of the cassette recording. 2 weeks ago, Eleanor Whitman secretly recorded a conversation between herself, Victoria Hargrove, and Mayor Caldwell. In this conversation, she informed them of her intention to tell David Robertson the truth about his Uncle Thomas's death. Mayor Caldwell responded, and I quote, "If you do this, Ellie, I'll destroy you. Everything we've built, everything we've become it, all goes away. I won't let that happen. Whatever it takes." The color drained from Caldwell's face as I pushed the transcript toward him. His attorney quickly scanned it, her expression remaining professional, though I could see the concern in her eyes. "A recording made without the consent of all parties is inadmissible in court," she stated. "In some circumstances, yes, I agreed. But when it provides evidence of a conspiracy to commit a crime, exceptions apply. Especially when that recording is corroborated by other evidence, such as Eleanor's journal detailing the events of July 4, 1972, and the subsequent cover-up." I turned my attention directly to Caldwell. "We know what happened that night, Mayor. We know that Thomas Robertson didn't drown accidentally while swimming alone. We know that you and your friends, including Eleanor and Victoria, took him unconscious in a boat to the middle of the lake as a prank. We know that when he woke up, he fought with you, fell overboard, and drowned. And we know that instead of reporting the truth, you all covered it up." "That was 50 years ago," Caldwell finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were kids. It was a terrible accident, but we were scared." Robert, his attorney, began, but he waved her off. "No, it's over. She has it all." He looked up at me with defeated eyes. "Yes, it happened just like that. It was a stupid, drunken prank that went horribly wrong. None of us meant for Tom to die. When he went under, we tried to save him, but the water was dark, the current strong. By the time we got help, it was too late, and afterwards, I prompted. He sighed heavily. We agreed to say he'd gone swimming alone. No one questioned it, much Tom had been drinking heavily, showing off all night. It was believable that he'd do something reckless. We convinced ourselves we were protecting each other, protecting our futures. But it went beyond that, didn't it? I pressed. Over the years, you and Victoria systematically targeted the Robertson family's properties, using your growing influence to pressure them financially, manipulate zoning laws, gradually taking control of the lakefront where Thomas died. Why? Caldwell's face twisted with something like shame. It started as a way to protect ourselves. If we controlled the property, we controlled the narrative. But over time, it became, I don't know, a compulsion. Like if we could own that piece of the lake, somehow we could own what happened there, contain it. And when Eleanor threatened to tell David Robertson everything, his expression hardened. I didn't kill her, if that's what you're asking. I threatened her, yes. I was desperate to keep the past buried. But murder? No. Then what happened the night she disappeared? He hesitated, and I could see him calculating how much to reveal. The last time I saw Eleanor was at the gala. We argued briefly about her plans to confess everything. I left around 10:30, went straight home. My wife can confirm that. What about Victoria Hargrove? I asked. Did you speak with her that night about Eleanor's plans? Victoria and I talked earlier that day. She was as upset as I was about Eleanor's decision. She said she'd try to reason with her one more time at the gala. Reason with her how? Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. Victoria can be persuasive. And she had the most to lose if the truth came out. Her entire real estate empire is built on properties acquired from the Robertson family over the years. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Ray. Dive team found something. Coming in now. I looked back at Caldwell. Mayor, I believe you when you say you didn't personally harm Eleanor Whitman, but I think you know more than you're saying about what Victoria planned to do, and I think your silence makes you complicit again. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Ray entered, his expression grim. They found a body in the lake, he said quietly, near the underwater rock formation you mentioned. They're bringing it in now. I nodded, feeling the heavy certainty I'd been expecting since finding the blood in the boathouse. Thank you, Ray. Keep the mayor here. I'll be right back. In the hallway, Ray filled me in on more details. The body was weighted down with what appears to be boat anchors. The medical examiner is on scene, but preliminary observation suggests the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Consistent with the blood evidence in the boathouse, I noted. What about identification? The clothing matches what Eleanor Whitman was reported wearing at the gala, including one emerald earring that matches the description of her jewelry that night. We'll need dental records or DNA for official confirmation, but it's her, I said with certainty. Where's Lily Whitman now? Still at the station. Her attorney is with her. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for one of the hardest parts of my job. I'll tell her about the body once we have preliminary confirmation. In the meantime, I want Victoria Hargrove formally charged with murder. And tell the prosecutor we'll be recommending accessory after the fact charges for Mayor Caldwell, plus conspiracy charges for both of them related to the original cover-up of Thomas Robertson's death. As Ray left to carry out these instructions, I gathered my thoughts. The case was breaking open, but I still hadn't heard Victoria Hargrove's side of what happened the night Eleanor disappeared. If she was responsible for Eleanor's death, I wanted to understand why beyond the obvious motive of silencing her before she could reveal their shared secret. When I returned to Victoria's interview room, her lawyer had arrived, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as James Winters from a prestigious city law firm. My client has been detained for several hours without formal charges, he began. We demand your client is going to be charged with the murder of Eleanor Whitman, I interrupted. We have recovered a body from the lake near Mrs. Hargrove's boathouse, along with substantial physical evidence linking her to the crime. I'm here to give her one opportunity to explain what happened that night, before formal charges are filed. Victoria's composed facade had begun to crack. but she still maintained remarkable control. After a whispered consultation with her attorney, she straightened her shoulders and met my gaze. "I want a deal," she said flatly. "That's not my department," I replied. "But the prosecutor will certainly consider cooperation when making recommendations to the court." Another whispered conference with her lawyer. Then Victoria nodded. "Very well." I did confront Eleanor the night of the gala. She had become a liability with her sudden attack of conscience about Thomas Robertson. After 50 years of silence, she was going to destroy everything we'd built, everything we'd become. For what? To clear her conscience? To impress her daughter? The bitterness in her voice was palpable. I followed her to her study during the party, tried to reason with her one last time. She was adamant she was going to tell David Robertson everything, expose all of us, we argued. It got heated. "What happened then?" I prompted when she paused. She turned away from me, said the conversation was over. I didn't plan it. There was a heavy marble paperweight on her desk. I grabbed it and... Victoria's voice faltered for the first time. I hit her, just once. But it was enough. She collapsed. There was so much blood. "You killed her in her study," I said, piecing it together. "That's why no one saw her leave." "But how did you get her body out without being seen?" Victoria's expression was almost clinical now, detached. The service corridor behind her study connects to the kitchen area. I wrapped her in a tablecloth from the study's side table, dragged her through the corridor and out the service entrance to my car. Everyone was focused on the gala in the main areas of the house. No one noticed. And Lily? She was found unconscious in the garden. "A necessary complication," Victoria admitted. "I saw her walking alone near the garden after I'd hidden Eleanor's body in my car. I realized she'd make the perfect suspect, the estranged daughter who stood to inherit millions. I approached her, offered her a drink I'd drugged with her own anxiety medication that I knew she carried in her purse. Once she was unconscious, I arranged the scene, putting soil and some of Eleanor's blood on her hands. The cold calculation of it was chilling. Then you drove Eleanor's body to your boathouse?" Victoria nodded. "I planned to take my boat out immediately and dispose of her in the lake. But there were still too many people around, guests leaving the gala. I had to wait until after midnight. I kept her body in the boathouse until then. When I finally took the boat out, I weighted her down with anchors and dropped her near the underwater rocks, where I knew the current was strong and the water deep." "The cufflink from David Robertson?" I asked. "Another attempt to frame someone else?" "I took it from Eleanor's study. She had it in a small dish on her desk. Apparently, David had lost it during a dinner at the estate the previous week. It seemed convenient." I nodded, disgusted, but not surprised by the extent of her manipulation. "One last question, Mrs. Hargrove. The blood in the gardening shed on the Whitman property, how did you manage that?" For the first time, a small, grim smile crossed Victoria's face. "I serve on the board of the local hospital, detective. Accessing blood from the lab isn't difficult with the right influence. It was Eleanor's blood type, but not actually hers. Just another layer of misdirection. The thoroughness of her deception was impressive in its own twisted way. She had methodically created evidence pointing to both Lily and David, using her knowledge of police procedures to craft a compelling narrative of their guilt while covering her own tracks. "Thank you for your candor, Mrs. Hargrove," I said, rising from my chair. "Officer Jenkins will formally process your arrest for the murder of Eleanor Whitman. The district attorney will also be filing charges related to the death of Thomas Robertson in 1972 and the subsequent cover-up." As I turned to leave, Victoria called after me. "Detective, for what it's worth, I never wanted any of this to happen. Not Thomas, not Eleanor. We were all just trying to protect the lives we'd built." I paused at the door. "The tragedy, Mrs. Hargrove, is that the lives you built were founded on the death of an innocent young man and the manipulation of his family. Eleanor Whitman finally understood that no success is worth that price. It's a shame you never reached the same conclusion." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Formal charges filed against Victoria Hargrove and Mayor Caldwell. Preliminary confirmation that the body recovered from the lake was indeed Eleanor Whitman, and the difficult task of informing Lily that her mother had been found. Lily's grief was raw and real, but there was also a strange relief in finally knowing the truth, not just about her mother's fate, but about the web of lies that had surrounded her family for decades. She was trying to make things right, Lily said softly, as we sat in a quiet corner of the station. All these years, she carried this horrible secret, and in the end, she was willing to risk everything to tell the truth. She wanted to protect you, I told her. And David. She saw your relationship as a chance for redemption, a way to heal the harm that had been done to his family. Lily wiped away tears. What happens now? To Victoria and Mayor Caldwell? They'll face justice for both Eleanor's death and their role in covering up what happened to Thomas Robertson. The truth about how they've manipulated the Robertson family over the years will come out. It won't bring back Thomas or your mother, but it will set the record straight after all this time. David Robertson joined us then, still trying to process everything he'd learned about his family's history and the true nature of his uncle's death. The weight of generational trauma was visible in the slump of his shoulders, but there was determination in his eyes. My family has lived under the shadow of this lie for 50 years without even knowing it, he said. All the financial struggles, the gradual loss of our properties, it was all connected to Uncle Thomas's death. They've been punishing us for a crime they committed. The evidence Eleanor gathered will help set things right, I assured him. The manipulated zoning changes, the predatory business practices Victoria and Robert used to target your family's holdings, all of it will be reviewed in light of these revelations. In the following days, the case that had begun as a mysterious disappearance was resolved into its complex truth. Victoria Hargrove and Robert Caldwell were indicted not just for their roles in Eleanor's death and Thomas Robertson's drowning, but also for decades of financial crimes and abuse of power. The scandal rocked Millhaven to its foundations, exposing corruption that had affected nearly every aspect of the town's development. Eleanor Whitman was laid to rest in a private ceremony, her final act of courage acknowledged in the justice that was finally being served. Lily and David, united by grief and the strange intersection of their families' histories, began the process of healing and rebuilding. As for me, I prepared to return to my regular duties. Another cold case resolved, another buried truth brought to light. But before I left Millhaven, I took one last walk along the shores of Lake Serenity. The water was calm that day, belying the dark secrets it had kept for so many years. I thought about Eleanor Whitman, who had lived with guilt for decades before finding the courage to face the truth, even at the cost of her life. I thought about Victoria Hargrove and Robert Caldwell, who had built their success on a foundation of lies, only to see it all crumble when those lies were finally exposed. And I thought about Thomas Robertson, who had died too young, his memory distorted by a false narrative created to protect his killers. The truth always emerges eventually. It may take 50 years, it may cost more lives, but in the end, buried secrets refuse to stay buried. The only choice we really have is whether to face them honestly or let them corrupt us from within. The moral lesson. As I stand here today, sharing this story with you, I'm reminded of something I've learned in my 30 years as a detective. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Victoria Hargrove and Mayor Caldwell didn't start out as killers or corrupt officials. They began as frightened young people who made one terrible decision to hide the truth about a tragic accident. But that first lie required another and another, until their entire lives became an elaborate construction built around protecting their secret. With each passing year, the stakes grew higher, the potential consequences more severe, until they reached a point where murder seemed like a logical step to preserve the false reality they'd created. Eleanor Whitman shared in their original sin, but she found the courage to face the truth before it completely consumed her. She understood something profound that her former friends never grasped, that no amount of success, wealth, or power is worth the corrosion of the soul that comes from living a lie. I ask you to consider, what lies are you telling yourself today? What uncomfortable truths are you avoiding? They may not be as dramatic as covering up a death, but even small deceptions can grow over time, limiting your life and warping your perception of reality. The truth, painful as it sometimes is, offers freedom. Eleanor Whitman died in the process of reclaiming that freedom, of attempting to right a wrong that had poisoned multiple generations. Her courage cost her everything, but it also broke a cycle of deception that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. If there's one lesson to take from this tragic case, it's this: face your truths now, before they grow into monsters you can no longer control. Have the difficult conversations, make the hard admissions, seek forgiveness where needed, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is to live as Victoria and Robert did, in constant fear of exposure, prisoners of their own deceit. Ask yourself, if you were in Eleanor's position with a long-buried secret that had shaped your entire life, would you have the courage to finally speak the truth, knowing it might cost you everything? Or would you, like Victoria and Robert, continue the deception, adding new lies to protect the old ones until your entire existence became a fragile house of cards? The choices we make in moments of crisis, whether to be honest or to deceive, whether to take responsibility or to blame others, reveal our true character. Eleanor Whitman ultimately chose truth and justice over self-preservation, and in doing so, she demonstrated a moral courage that her former friends lacked. As you go forward from here, remember that integrity isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to acknowledge them, to make amends, and to bear the consequences of your actions with dignity. That is the true measure of character and the foundation of a life lived authentically, without the crushing weight of secrets and lies. Call to action. Now that you've heard this story, I hope it stays with you, not just as an interesting case, but as a reminder of the importance of truth in your own life. Share this story with someone you care about, not for entertainment alone, but for the conversations it might spark about honesty, integrity, and the courage to face difficult truths. In our increasingly complex world, where it's easier than ever to present a carefully curated version of reality, genuine truth-telling becomes both more challenging and more vital. Consider what parts of your life might benefit from greater honesty, even if that honesty comes with temporary discomfort. If you found value in this journey through the Lakeside Legacy case, I invite you to subscribe to the Shernin channel for more investigations that delve into the darker corners of human nature while illuminating the path toward justice and reconciliation. Your support enables these stories to reach a wider audience, perhaps touching someone who needs to hear exactly this message. Remember, the most important truths are often the hardest to face, but they're also the ones that can set us free. Choose courage over comfort, honesty over easy deception, and integrity over expediency. In the long run, as Eleanor Whitman ultimately understood, the truth is the only foundation sturdy enough to build a life of meaning and purpose. Thank you for joining me in this investigation. Until next time, I'm Detective Marcus Shernin, reminding you that the truth, however long buried, always finds its way to the light. Disclaimer: the story you've just heard is fictional. All characters, locations, and events are products of imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or actual events is entirely coincidental. This presentation is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or encourage any form of investigation into actual cold cases by viewers.